Science degree in nursing from East Carolina University. She also holds a certification in the care of adult medical and surgical patients. She is a wife, mother, and born again child of the Most High King.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Family Health Matters. I'm your host, Wendy Bridgers, and we are live in the studio on today. Excuse me. In the studio today, here on Awesome Radio 106.9 FM on Family Health Matters. We are here every Thursday from 3 to 3:30 with information that can help you and your family, because we do believe that the health of our families matter. Have with me as the guest today our favorite psychologist, counselor, Mrs. Maya Pittman. Welcome, Maya. Thank you for being here again with us on today.
Yes, thank you for having me again.
Good, good. I look forward to being with you. Not that I don't like all my other guests. I look forward to hearing what you have to say to help me mentally.
Well, I look forward to sharing. I appreciate you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have a great topic on today. We're going to be talking about something that I have heard especially since the pandemic. When the pandemic started, I heard people talking about this and people just giving comments. It just sort of now has become a second word or just an easy thought. But we're talking about self-care and what it really means.
Yes.
What it really means. What it really means. Okay. So we're going to be talking about that today because I think that we feel like self-care is almost like a luxury. And that is something that maybe somebody who is wealthy or somebody who's retired or somebody who is just not doing as much as we ourselves are doing, that's their luxury. But everybody should own their self-care.
Yes.
So we're going to start off with jumping right into this, Maya, and just starting off maybe with just telling us why this is just important and why are we talking about it today and what does it mean?
Absolutely. Well, I think you start out with a good point. I think we're talking about it today because self-care is one of those things that's non-negotiable. It has to be considered as being a part of our life at all times. And especially right now, there is still a pandemic going on. My daughter's daycare shut down this week because of it.
Yeah.
And there are still things that we are adjusting to and changing. And so it's important because earlier you mentioned this idea of luxury. And if you think about how often we consider vacations, some of us may only take a vacation once a year, once every few years, 5 years even. And if you associate self-care with something like a vacation, that would mean that we think of self-care as something we only get every so often. But it's important because we have to think about how to weave it into our daily lives as often as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we're at the table on today, for you to help us figure out how we can weave this into our lives. And it just becomes not even a second nature, but a primary.
Yes.
It's priority on how we're going to take care of ourselves and how we're going to implement self-care on a regular basis for us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's jump in with a little bit more of a definition of self-care and then tell us about self-care and the different types and how do we know if we're even doing it right?
Sure. So self-care is really any deliberate action or an activity that we do to take care of our physical selves, our mental selves, and our emotional selves. And so I think the key word in that definition is deliberate action. So it's an act. It isn't necessarily something that we experience, although it can be, but it's something that we intentionally have to do and sometimes even plan. And I think what's interesting is, again, we think about self-care and we think massage, or we think something that is luxurious. But one of the important things to keep in mind about self-care is feeling calm or feeling relaxed is actually a byproduct of self-care. And so there may be some deliberate activities that we have to do to take care of our mental, emotional, or physical selves that don't necessarily feel good, but they're for our good. And so those are some of the things that we have to consider when we think about self-care.
Okay, good, good. And I like too the thought about the fact that it's not just managing like you said, luxury, but it's also managing and taking self-care of your medications, self-care of your daily activities and things like that. So it's just not limited to what people might say mentally, or thinking that it's just all about, I sit here and I have a spa day, or I do one thing, but it's a combination of everything that compiles up or makes up our self-care.
Definitely. So when you think about self-care, you said mental self-care, and that is the gateway. But there are actually six, some people may argue even up to 8 or 10 different types of self-care. But one of those 6 types of self-care is mental self-care. And although we may associate mental with calming and relaxing, mental self-care is actually any activity that stimulates your mind or your intellect. So these are things like reading, or maybe solving a puzzle, or even maybe playing chess with a friend. I think this is important because mental self care is one of those things that we can implement easily into family time. So whereas we're, again, maybe so used to doing our own thing when we get home, I have heard of families, and I think I mentioned this in our last show, who shut down and take an hour of just rest. And that
Mhm.
rest is to do anything stimulating. So you can go off and read, you can go off and reflect, but anything for your mind. Another type of self care that we typically don't think about is called practical self care. So, practical self care is actually tasks that we fulfill, some core aspects of our life. So, these are things like budgeting, or taking a professional development class or a personal development class. Practical self care are the things that we do so that we can prevent stressful situations later. So, things like organizing your closet, for example, they may not be the most glamorous pieces of self care to do, but it's going to feel really, really good when you have to go and find that dress or find that outfit for school and everything is in its place.
That is good. That I like that practical piece, because because part of self-care is figuring out how to decrease the amount of stress that you have.
Yeah.
And just your thought, just a comment about, just budgeting and having a budget, having a plan, it decreases stress.
Yes.
And I've never thought about the practical piece, so that's great. So I'm gonna write that down. That's this practical self-care. Those things that we just take for granted that it's a chore, because I think about cleaning the closet as a chore. But as you said, that going back to be able to pick up something or find something easily decreases the amount of stress that I would have if I'm in a hurry to go to a meeting or needing something really quickly to go somewhere, and I can put my hand right on it. Awesome. Okay, good,
Yeah.
good.
And you're hitting on a really good point too, which is we want to think about self care as being something proactive, not reactive.
Mm.
So, one of the things about self care is we sort of wait till the last minute, or we wait until something happens and then we say, oh, I got to take care of myself. When we should actually be thinking about, well, what can I do that's going to prevent me from being in a situation where I have to rush to fix or take care of myself? And so, if you kind of consider what we call spring cleaning, right? Imagine
Mm.
if it was spring, summer, fall, and winter cleaning, and what that would mean for your experience throughout the entire year, as opposed to at the top of a season, for example.
That is great. That is great, because if you look at it all the time, then you're right. You wouldn't have to feel like I have to just stop and I have to plan a day that I can go to the spa, or I have to stop and plan a day that I can go for a walk, because if you've been proactive, you've already scheduled that into your planning time.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Good, good. That's good. Self-care. Okay. Understanding what it really means, instead of people just so easily saying, I've just gotta, I've got to stop and do self-care now. I've got to take care of myself. Yes, but we should be doing this continuously.
Definitely. And there's 3 things that self-care, why it's important, and what it does do. One of the things that does is prevents mood, or I'm sorry, improves mood. And so when you think about emotional self-care, which is another type of self-care, this is any type of reflection or processing, maybe even going to see a therapist, anything that deals with your emotions. And this is so important because as a therapist, one of the symptoms that I see a lot of people experiencing, no matter what the mental health concern is, are how they feel and how they react towards other people. So for example, a lot of times people may find that they're very irritated or get very angry with others, and they don't realize that they've actually built up a great amount of stress and anxiety in their lives. And so self-care is not just meant for you, but it's meant for the people around you, because at some point, if you don't take care of self, it will absolutely come off on loved ones, family members, friends, and maybe even coworkers, which would not be an ideal situation.
That is so true. That goes back to planning again, that if you don't allow all of that to build up, if you go back and do those places where you actually stop. And we often talk about communication, taking time with the family, talking about what's going on, what your day was like. All of that, to me, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, is part of self-care.
Yes, self-care. We want to think about self-care as self-maintenance. How do I maintain, how do I sustain this state of balance so that I don't have to do so much makeup or what we call damage control in our lives? So similarly to what you're talking about, there's another type of self-care called social self-care. And these are any type of activity or any type of intentional act meant to deepen the relationships that we have in our lives. And so again, I think especially with families, there's always something to do, and we follow a very tight routine, and things can get very monotonous that we forget to, as I always say on the show, check in with people, have conversations, ask them what's going on in their lives and how they feel. What we don't realize is this is actually a really great act of self-care, and it can be relieving not only for the person engaging, but the person who's getting asked those questions, or the person who's brought to the table, if you will.
That's great. That's great. Because I think, as you were talking, I was thinking about how hard we work to connect, especially during COVID. We were trying to connect back to family members, connect to our coworkers, being in an office or being on Zoom, trying to make that connection. But how often do we realize how have we connected with ourselves?
Yes.
And so now looking at self-care, it's partly about connecting with ourselves, recognizing what we need to help us
Absolutely.
be the best that we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, Wendy, is we're all a part of systems. So what that means is no matter what it is, if we were to break down our lives into like a pie chart, and each piece of the pie belongs to a different area of our life. So we may have a piece of the pie that belongs to our working life, a piece of the pie that belongs to our family and friends life or our social life. And then there are pieces of the pie that belong to ourselves or have nothing to do with anyone else. And so if you think about it like that, we want to consider spreading self-care across the entire pie as opposed to just ourselves, because at any given point in time, anything that affects or impacts us absolutely affects those around us. And that's why mental health in general is just so important, because it helps for the overall working of all of the systems in our lives.
Oh, I love that example with the pie. Yeah, because that helps you not be self-centered.
Exactly.
And it's all about me. And I think sometimes when we think about self-care, we get into the zone that it's about me. And I know we just said earlier, I said it's not a luxury, it's for everybody. But I like the way you brought it in, how you said that your self-care can affect everybody that's around you. That if you're not getting it or figuring out how it can be part of your daily routine, instead of just something that you just say, today I need to do self-care, but it will flow, and then you will have a continuous like a relationship going on with your family.
Absolutely. And you when you said self-centeredness, that reminded me of another type of self-care, which is spiritual self-care. And sometimes we think about this as having to do with church or religion, and it doesn't necessarily have to, although it can. But spiritual self-care is any activity that nurtures your spirit and allows you to think bigger than yourself. And so it's actually a way of, again, stepping outside of maybe our tendency to be self-centered or think about self, and really consider, well, what is bigger than me? How am I a part of the various aspects of life? And this allows us to be in a place where we can help others, where we can be more giving, more empathetic, which is also a major component of self-care. And so you're absolutely right. Self-care actually helps us think a little bit less about ourselves and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, because if we have maintenance and have good self care, we're not so stressed about what we're doing and what we're not doing. So we can focus on somebody else or something other than ourselves. I
Yes.
really love that bigger than me. I like that a lot about that as far as thinking about self care, because if you're taken care of, then you have something to overflow. There's that overflow that you
Mm,
have, that you can share something with somebody else, because everything really is bigger than we really are.
yes.
It's just our daily life is bigger than what we can really see. If we could just
Uh-huh.
see sometimes what God sees, then we'll just be so much further down the road. But I really like that sort of resonates with me, bigger than me, because I think that if we could all look at that everything is really bigger than what we are, then we would be so much better, and we could pull so many other people in our lives, because we can't handle it all.
Yeah.
We have to sort of, like you do with that pie chart, you have to spread it out. You have to spread that out. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great.
Yeah. You know what, when you said, spreading it out, that reminds me of how we go about self-care, right? And so one of the things also to think about is it should not be forced, right? Like, self-care
Mhm.
is not meant to take from us, it's meant to refuel us. And so a lot of times we may be hearing all this information and thinking, oh, it's another thing that I have to schedule, another thing that I have to think about. But self-care is really to be enjoyed, so we want to think about, well, how is this benefiting me? I often encourage people to consider what they don't like doing. And there are ways that we can find resources to help us take care of the things maybe that we don't like. And so, an example of that within the family structure is, let's say, one person always does the organizing and they can't stand it. It may be something to consider getting the whole family involved with. And again, getting creative with some of the things that have to be taken care of. And so, if at any time you are engaged in self care and then you start to feel drained, I would encourage you to give yourself permission to step away and say, you know what, I'm going to finish this piece of self care at another time. It should not be something that drains you, it shouldn't necessarily be something that you dread.
Oh, so with that being said, does that mean that self care, the physical piece with exercise, because that is something that drains you and you can't dread it?
And that's the thing. I think, again, right, we've got to get creative. So you bring up the last piece of self-care that we mentioned today, which is physical self-care. And these are, again, activities that improve the well-being of your physical health. So that may not necessarily mean running a marathon. It could be getting 8 hours of sleep every day, where maybe you find yourself only getting 5 or 6. It could be staying hydrated, so keeping a water bottle near your desk or at your work with you so that you can stay hydrated. Maybe taking a walk during your lunch break. And so, again, we don't have to consider self-care these grandiose things that we dread, because I do not like long distance running, but it can feel really good to take an afternoon walk with the family, or something to that nature. Just the idea of physical well-being.
Okay, I like that, because people could use that as an excuse and
Oh
say,
yeah.
they said today on the broadcast that there shouldn't be anything that we dread, and I dread going to the gym and walking that mile or 2 miles in certain length of time. So
Yeah.
that's clarity. So we can still do our exercise, but it doesn't have to be something that's going to make us hate doing it.
Yes. And again, right? I want to think about self-care as being something that's for the long-term benefit of myself. And so, again, I would dread being late because I misplaced something. And so if I'm in the present moment committed and open to organizing, I can eliminate the experience of dread later. So sometimes we have to think about it like that. Even though I may not be fully enjoying this activity for too long, what would it be saving me from in the future? And that, a lot of times, has such a greater impact than the little bit of discomfort we may feel in the moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's good. So it goes back to having that closet organized. So
I
that
know
you
you're thinking, you sound like you're thinking about a closet right now. You got to get to.
I know I do have to get to a closet. I've been putting off all summer.
And
Oh,
I'll give you some
Maya, hang
sure.
on a second. We've got a caller. Let's
Okay.
see. Oh, they hung up because you know what? If you're out there, caller, please call back because I did not know how to answer that phone, but I will have it next time. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on your conversation.
No, I think I love how we're able to share some of our experiences. I have a Tupperware to the brim of one of the cabinets. So I have given myself 2 weeks, and every time I go in that cabinet, I take out little by little. And so
Ah,
I think it's a great example of how I'm not going to overwhelm myself. I'm going to capitalize on my time, and then I'll look up in 2 weeks and my task is done. That is a way that we can capitalize, be creative with, and not involve dread within the self care that we need.
oh, I love that. I love that. So maybe if I start taking a little bit out of the closet at a time, and you know what, and this is talking personal, but I think that is one of the problems that I have is I pull out everything and it's overwhelming. And some people can do that. Some people can pull out everything and sort
Yeah.
through and keep going. But I can let it overwhelm me into the point that I'm looking at everything and go, well, I'll come back and do this later. And then it's bedtime and can't nobody go to bed because I got stuff everywhere.
Yes, but Wendy, you're speaking to an amazing point. Is that self care is tailor made. You really have to do some analysis and some thinking about how do I really need to go about this. And so a lot of times we pull ideas of self care from, again, like we spoke about last time, the media, social media articles. But we have to turn inward and really understand what self-care has to look like for us as an individual. It may not look like anyone else's. And so that's a charge and a challenge to our audience and to everyone who's listening, is to just take a moment and understand what you don't like and what you do like, how you need to go about things.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So now I hear a lot of times about women talking about self-care. So let's just focus a little bit about how can we pull the men into realizing that they need self-care as well.
Absolutely. And
Excuse me.
uh, again, when we think about self-care from a systems perspective, when it comes to the families, we know our family members better than anyone else most often. We see them, we understand, and we get an understanding of what they need, what they respond to, and what they want. And so sometimes it may take a push or a gift for those in our lives who are a little bit more stubborn with self-care. And so that may mean if everyone's in one room of the house, maybe a family member says, hey, you all, you know what? Let's let uncle or dad or grandpa have the room to himself for a while and let's all go do something else. And so there's a way to create these spaces for men or for people who may not lean into self-care a little bit easier than others to help them get the ball rolling. Another aspect is sharing how their lack of self-care may be impacting us, and so
Oh,
about presenting an observation, saying to someone, hey, I noticed that on Thursdays in particular, your long days, you seem a little bit stressed and it makes me very nervous. How can we help you decrease that stress? And this plants a seed. You know what? I got to be doing a better job at taking care of myself in this way because I don't want to impact my family like that. And so those are ways that we can kind of encourage people to engage in self-care and get the picture that it's about more than just them.
yeah, that's great. And you know what? That too brings back giving somebody permission.
Yes.
Sometimes people need permission to
Yes,
take care of
absolutely.
themselves or permission to do something.
Mhm.
So giving them permission to, okay, so yes, you need to take care of yourself. So you have permission. And then I think too, what you said about giving the space, even down to the point of giving somebody a gift card or something, or a gym membership or something, just simple, and say, this is for you to go and this is time for you. And I think that would make a difference too, because I just seem like sometimes men they have different ways, I guess, of perceiving their perception of self-care. And not that it's, like you say, individual. It has to be individual.
Yes, absolutely. And from a gender perspective, a lot of times men, they get more refueled or they communicate best through doing. through
Yeah.
activities. And so even just thinking about how to encourage them to have the space and time to engage, because sometimes there may be limited time to think about some of these things. And so you're absolutely right. Giving someone permission, letting them know, hey, we'll be okay. We want you to do this. And then afterwards, reinforcing it by asking them about what that was like. Did you enjoy yourself? I hope that that was a pleasant time for you. And that kind of subconsciously reinforces this idea that, you know what, yeah, I need to be doing this a little bit more often.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Because sometimes, you know how we start something, but there's no conclusion.
Yes.
And so that is great because if you make the effort to give them the time or allow them to have the space to follow up and have a conclusion of it, is to turn around and ask, well, how was it? How did it benefit it? You know, so I love that because sometimes we just, we do it and we just keep getting up and we don't say anything. And the person is like, okay, you know, do I talk about it or do I wait for them to talk about it? And not only with men, that's with women as well, and friends as
Yes.
well. So it's
Mhm.
important to share that and ask them, do the follow up. I love that. I love that.
Absolutely. And children too, I think we underestimate that children need self-care as well. I'll think about my daughter again. There's a point in her day that's just meant for rest. She probably won't be taking a nap, but she'll be able to slow down, refuel, and we don't even realize that even as young as infants on up, there are these little pockets where they need a moment to kind of decompress as well.
Yeah, and if you notice, and I'm sure you've noticed this with your daughter, when they do get to that point that they need some time, they get irritable. And that goes back to what you said or earlier about letting your emotions overflow into something else or into somebody else. And you notice that. And if you can cuddle them and rock them and soothe them, it's just like, wow, and they're gone or they're asleep or they're just something that they will just conform to after
Yeah.
they realize that it's okay, that I have that space. So this is great. Now
Yes.
if you had to share, okay, let's talk about this really quickly, what it isn't.
Hmm. So again, what it is not forced. And so
Okay.
self-care should not be something that is forced, something that you dread doing, something that may even make you mentally or physically sick to think about. Self-care is also not expensive. Self-care does not have to be something that you have to spend money on. We think about that also, like, I want to engage in self-care, but I really can't afford it this month. There is self-care beyond any type of price that we can consider and implement into our lives. And also, when we think about self-care, as I was mentioning earlier, self-care is not one size fits all. So
Yeah.
self-care is tailor-made, it's very custom and individualized. And so how you respond to something may not be how someone else does. And so while we can get ideas from other people, we have to engage in trial and error to see what works best for us.
Wonderful, wonderful. This has been awesome. It's been great, Maya. As always, I always enjoy you, and this is just real. We need to do our self-care, and we need to make sure that it's a continuous thing and not just when we're overwhelmed with what's going on. So
Absolutely.
again, thank you, Maya Pittman, for being here with
Thank
us, and we
you.
look forward to having you back soon. And
Yes.
again, I'm your host, Wendy Bridgers. We are here every Thursday from 3 to 3:30 on Family Health Matters, be on Awesome Radio 106.9 FM. So we invite you to join us. If you have any topics or anything that you want to share with us, we welcome those. And next time, if you call me, I promise I'll answer the phone. So again, I'm your host, Wendy Bridgers, Family Health Matters, Awesome Radio 106.9 FM.
Thank you for listening to
Thank
WBI.
you.